the 12th Women's World Chess Champion Alexandra Kostyniuk is here with you, and today we're gonna talk about queen versus pawn, one pawn, endgames. I think I've covered the most important pawnless endgames in the previous videos, and so now we're starting to discuss endgames with one pawn, starting with the most powerful piece. When a queen fights against one pawn, of course, since the queen is the most powerful piece in chess, a pawn can really make a draw only if it's very close to being promoted. If a pawn is located on the B, G, D or E files, usually the winning method is a very easy one, and queen wins in 99.9% of the cases. It's more complicated with the A, H, and C and F pawns. Let's have a look what happens if queen fights against a knight's pawn. This position is from my youth game in the World Championship Girls Under 10 in 1994. I was playing black, and here it's my turn to move, luckily for me, because otherwise the pawn would promote and the game will be drawn, and I have time to give a check. What is the winning method? Since white is threatening to promote this pawn, it's not possible to win with one queen only. We need to bring our king to this pawn in order to win the game. But for that, we need to force the opponent's king to blockade this pawn, and that helps us to win the time, which is needed to bring our king closer. So let's see how it goes. The winning method usually requires a lot of checks, but it's quite an easy one. We give check, we bring our queen a little bit one step closer to the pawn, and thus, when it's on the 6th rank, we give this check, queen to c6, and we kind of force white's king to get in front of this pawn, thus getting time to bring the king closer. And then when the king goes to a7, and this threat of this pawn being promoted is again in the air, a few more accurate moves once again with pins, thus forcing this king to go in front of this pawn and bringing the king one step closer. And when it reaches the pawn is being trapped and won. The method is similar when we're talking about the central pawns. Again, it's quite long, but not complicated at all. Just alternating checks and attacks, we bring our queen closer to the opponent's pawn. We give a check that forces black's king to blockade its own pawn, and then we bring our king one step further. When it goes to c2, the method repeats itself. Check, king goes to d1. It gives us time to come one step closer. And again, and again, and again. Quite easy. Winning the pawn and the game. Usually, this kind of endgames arise from pawn endgames when there are pawns races. For example, this endgame is from my blitz game, and we can see that my pawn runs forward, and black is also trying to run with his pawn to promote it. But unfortunately for black, my pawn promotes into queen one move faster, and that gives me time to start checking my opponent's king and thus bringing my own king closer. And we know the drill: checks from this side and from that side, and bringing the king closer and closer until this pawn is won. That's all you need to know about winning with a queen against pawns that are located on central files and on knight's files. There are exceptions, as always in chess, very rare study-like exceptions, but draws can happen. Let me just show those rare cases. For example, here it's white to move, and the pawn is located on the central file. But unfortunately for white, this king stops white from giving a check. There are no possible checks, and because of that, it's a draw. And one more study-like position, it's actually from a study by Troitsky, the same chess composer that we talked about when discussing two knights versus king endgame. White promotes his pawn into a queen, hoping that black would promote his pawn as well, but that gives white a beautiful chance to win. Unfortunately for white, black has even more beautiful way to save the game. Just by playing king e3. And surprisingly, even though we have, again, central pawn versus a queen, and it's white to move, and white can give a check, but none of the checks work, because if white delivers a check from the f file, whenever the king goes f5, f6, f7, doesn't matter, the black king goes to f2, and the f file is covered, so it's not possible to give a check, and e1 queen will be played on the next move. And if white goes to the d file with a check, unfortunately for them, black's king will go to d2. And again, the same story. The d file is covered, e1 queen is a threat, and the position is draw. But those are the two only exceptions, I think, that I know when pawn saves the game versus queen in these particular situations. So that's all what I wanted to share